Hi, everyone. Welcome to everyone. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody joining our webinar for today. We got a great conversation lined up. We're going to be talking about how to solve high-risk healthcare problems with low-code solutions. My name is Harry Stavridis. I'm going to host today's webinar. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function, and I'll look to cover those at the end. So I'm one of Macedon's directors of professional services. I oversee our partner accounts. I'm really excited to do this webinar with one of Macedon's partners, Inspirant Group. I've been leading IT projects for about 30 years now in both the commercial and project sectors. I really enjoy seeing how when IT is done right and when it's done with the right partners, it makes a measurable difference in the way that people do their jobs. And so here to talk about how we were able to make that difference for one of our joint team's healthcare clients is our human from Inspirant. Eric, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Harry. So I'm a director with Inspirant Group. I primarily direct systems integration projects that are focused on optimizing our clients' operational processes. I manage both business development and account implementation and have over 20 years experience in the healthcare and financial services industries. I'm very fortunate. I've been the ability to see projects from multiple perspectives because I've been both the client and the consultant at different times.
Awesome. And here to talk about how the Appian platform was so important to getting a solid solution off the ground quickly is Jake Saltzman. Jake, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked at Macedon for about 4 years where I'm a project lead. And I've had the opportunity to lead Appian projects across a bunch of different verticals like healthcare, which we're talking about today, as well as government and manufacturing. And in my role, I've been both the technical and the team lead. So I've had the opportunity to coach clients both on their Appian technical skills, but also their project management and leadership skills as well.
Great. Hey, before we dive into our topic, I want to take just a moment to talk about Inspirant and Macedon Technologies, two companies that started teaming to put together digital transformation solutions for healthcare back in 2018. So Eric, can you say a few words about Inspirant?
Sure. So Inspirant Group, it's a people-first organization, which is really what I love most about them. We recently won Built-in's Best Firms, Small Firms to Work For in Chicago. We take a lot of pride in our expertise. In fact, most of our consultants have an average of 20 plus years of experience. So we're truly seasoned professionals in what we do. We have experts in strategy and operations, in talent and organization, along with technology and data. And we partner with our clients from inspiration to transformation. We combine our big firm expertise with small firm agility and attention.
Got it. And at Macedon, we specialize in delivering intelligent automation solutions, and that's a core part of digital transformation. With over 100 clients and over 450 successful engagements, we've worked with organizations at every stage of digital transformation maturity. We've helped guide our clients in their journeys. We're the world leader at advanced certifications in Appian. That's a low-code business process management platform. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We're an Appian trusted partner and reseller as well. Okay, so Eric, our companies got started back in 2018 looking at a particular complex challenge for a healthcare payer. And I imagine that it could be tough going if you're either a healthcare payer or a provider that's looking to sync up with each other, especially with the sheer volume or healthcare procedures taking place nowadays involving lots and lots of different people. Take me back to what was going on back then.
Well, you're right, Harry. There are a lot of challenges going on with them, and insurers are really trying to reduce cost and waste in the healthcare system. So let me first start by telling you a little bit about what our client does, and then what the main problem they were trying to solve. I'm probably going to mention a few terms that not everyone on this call may be familiar with, so I'm going to explain a few of them just to get us all in a baseline situation. In the healthcare world, we have payers, providers, and members. Payers are your insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna, Humana, United Healthcare, and they pay part or maybe all of the services and procedures that their members are using, depending on which plan they have. The members are basically you and me, the patients that get the services. And these services can be anything from your basic health checkup with your doctor, maybe it's an MRI scan on your knee, maybe you're having physical therapy, or you actually have to have surgery. The providers are the doctors or the companies that are actually doing these procedures. Now, our client's primary business is really in utilization management. Many payers are able to review pre-approval requests through their utilization management solutions. However, sometimes they find these requests are very complicated and they need to be reviewed by medical staff. And for highly specialized services, these payers don't really want to employ doctors to review all of these requests. That's kind of expensive to keep them on staff. So these might include services in fields like medical oncology, cardiology, genetic testing, or rehab. And this is where our client really comes in. For these high cost specialty authorizations, payers will outsource them to our client for review, and then our client will either approve or deny those requests.
Can we back up for a minute? So you used a term there called utilization management. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. There are many processes in the healthcare that are really aimed at reducing costs, but they still want to maintain the quality of patient care because that's really, really important. So payers have put into place a cost control process by which they require different providers to obtain special approval prior to performing a specific procedure. These are really used for the high priced procedures. You may experience it yourself if you've ever gone to a doctor and the doctor recommended that you go see a specialist, or if you've taken physical therapy, they will likely have to call the insurance company to get it approved prior to you being able to utilize those services. The payer requires this because there may be other services or procedures that are less costly, yet still appropriate care for the patient. These pre-approvals aren't always required. You don't need them if a prior authorization if you're going to get stitches for a cut on your arm. But if you're going to have back surgery to repair a herniated disc, that would be something that you'd probably get a pre-approval for.
Okay. So it sounds like this is a way for insurers to reduce cost.
Yeah, exactly. If your doctor wants to prescribe an expensive drug, the payer may review the pre-approval request and suggest a different drug that is proven to be just as effective, but much lower in cost, which would be more beneficial to the patient. So not only do they look at the cost, but they also look to see, should the procedure be done where the doctor is recommending it? There's plenty of places that it can be done. Maybe the procedure can be done in an outpatient setting, like a doctor's office or a clinic, versus being done in a hospital. So if the doctor wants to recommend a hospital for procedure, the payer may suggest a different location. Maybe the doctor wants a patient to stay in a hospital for multiple days when they can really do the procedure and send the patient home that day, freeing up beds for other patients.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, the goal here isn't to deny someone care that they need, but it's really just to make sure that whatever's being done is effective and that there's not maybe like a lower cost or less invasive thing that can be done instead. The goal is to keep doctors and patients in the loop, and what their options are.
Yeah. So options for one group of people might actually be challenges for another group, right? So what challenges do insurers typically have with those?
Well, a big challenge is how do they ensure that the procedures that require these pre-authorizations actually had an appropriate one requested and approved. Once a provider has completed a service or procedure, they will bill the insurance company to get paid. This bill is called a claim, and they submit the claim and the payer reviews it. They look at the member's plan and they determine how much they owe versus how much maybe the member is responsible for. And for these high cost services that require this prior authorization, the payer attempts to match the claim to the pre-auth to ensure that, number one, the pre-auth was submitted and approved for the services or procedure. Number two, it was done in that appropriate setting, whether it's outpatient or in the hospital, whatever it was approved for. That it was done by the physician that requested the authorization, and it was done in the appropriate time frame that the authorization was good for.
Yeah, and another piece is the quantity management piece. So we want to check that perhaps another claim hasn't come and taken some of the quantity that they were authorized for in the first place. Maybe that's double billing, maybe it's a claim getting duplicated. But there's also times where this happens, like if someone's getting physical therapy, they might be authorized for 10 sessions, but the provider doesn't want to wait till all 10 are done because they want to get paid within their, in the month or within the week. So they'll bill each, session individually. And we want to make sure that, not all 10 are used or not more than 10 are used. So that way they can kind of keep track of, how many are left versus how many can, the person continue to have.
Yeah, you also see this happens for different types of care. For example, in radiation oncology, when trying to determine how much of a drug was approved versus administered to a patient. And there are times where there's actually multiple authorizations on file for the same procedure, and the health plan has a difficulty in matching the claim to the appropriate authorization. Maybe another example I can give you is when a patient has a surgery, there are actually several claims that are going to come in for that one procedure. You obviously have the physician that's performing the surgery, but you may have an anesthesiologist if it was used. The facility will likely have a claim as well. You may have a co-surgeon who was performing the procedure. So all these claims are submitted at different times, and the health plan has to figure out how to match them up to the right authorization and ensure that it was actually approved.
Yeah, and there's the issue of substitution, right? So if someone gets authorized for procedure A, but they might get a slightly different procedure, which should still be covered.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. So like a good example is when a doctor wants to do a scan on a patient, she may submit a pre-approval for a scan without contrast, but while doing the scan, the doctor may decide that they really need the scan with and without contrast. Well, they're not going to stop the scan and wait for a new pre-approval and then start the scan again. That would actually be more costly for everybody involved, including the patient, and very time consuming. So instead, they go ahead and do the scan with and without contrast, and they go ahead and bill that way. The procedure is still medically necessary, but the claim that the provider submits will have a different code than what was actually on the pre-authorization, and health plans really have a hard time matching the codes for similar procedures. Our client came to us to try to figure out the feasibility of a system that could match these claims and solve all of these problems for their customers, because health plans are basically approving and paying claims that they shouldn't have been, and providers are doing procedures that were not approved, and it's making a big expense for everybody involved.
So it sounds like the client was asking for a system that could handle a really broad set of claimed authorization scenarios. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's basically it.
So what were the first steps you took to tackle this?
So while we're excited to have the opportunity to build a custom solution like this, we really wanted to validate whether it was really truly in our client's best interest. At the beginning of almost all of our projects, we do an analysis phase to confirm our understanding of what the client's requirements are. If the results are not going to yield enough savings to justify the expense, or maybe there's potential products on the market that could fill these gaps versus having to do a custom build, we would recommend those alternatives to our client. Therefore, the first thing we did was substantiate the true business value of the solution.
So what kind of analysis did you guys do to start that up?
Well, first thing we did is we started examining past claim history and matched them to the prior authorizations that were on file. We could calculate what the potential savings for those claims based on what should have been paid versus what was paid, and what should have been denied or partially denied but wasn't. We also took a look at our clients' customers' current matching logic and what that did versus what the proposed solution would actually do, to try to figure out what are the real gaps that need to be built for this claims matching solution. And then after calculating the potential savings and gathering some more robust requirements, we next look to provide a better estimate of what the cost for building out the solution would actually be. This process looked at analyzing the current client architecture and enterprise services for integration needs. We looked at examining the data that they have in-house, along with what technologies that client was currently using and what they had experience with. We really wanted to look at tools that had out-of-the-box modules with extensive integration ability, low code, and can unify data from a number of sources to help streamline this development process. And our client is really familiar with Appian, and that, coupled with Appian's strengths, really led us to recommend building the solution in Appian. Due to Macedon's strengths in Appian, it was actually a natural fit to partner with you guys on this project.
We're glad you did. So I know for experience, they've been in the IT game for a while. I know that whenever you start a complicated project with a new technology, you're going to want to do some kind of proof of concept work. So did you guys do any initial development or proof of concept work when you get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So, once that value proposition was nailed down, the next step was building that proof of concept. So we could run, years worth of claims against years worth of authorizations and validate those assumptions that Eric was talking about earlier. Once that validation was done using the POC, then we could move out to build the full solution.
And for both that POC and the full solution, we took an agile methodology approach. We focused on doing incremental builds where we could show progress to the client every couple of weeks and catch any errors or make modifications quickly and early in the process. Our client manages several different care categories for utilization management, and we had to break those down based on different priorities, the complexity and relationship they had to each other. So we first want to really focus on building core functionality of the application, which basically included, passing a claim in from our customers, checking member information, verifying the provider information, being able to access different enterprise data services, and then producing a response. That was kind of core across all the solutions. And we use that to make our minimum viable product or MVP. And then we can kind of use that and build across that against other care categories. So once we had our MVP, all the different care categories have like nuanced logic in them. And we could focus on maybe a high priority one that was big for our client and our customers, but maybe lower in complexity scale and lower in volume to kind of get us moving and build out and figure out the kinks of the first MVP while still building additional solutions.
Sure. So Jake, I know you were really involved with the MVP, putting that out. Can you tell me what that looked like? What did you end up building out?
Yeah. So, I mean, as Eric mentioned, that MVP consisted of really the core engine components and the core checks. But we built it for a single payer across a single category. In this case, it was cardiology. So that was like one piece. It was the simple version of the claims processing. We also built out a set of tools that helped us run many claims in the engine at once and simulate user interaction, kind of more on the testing side. And what those two things allowed us to do is basically do large scale simulations of thousands of claims, have them processed fully, and then analyze the results.
When you say process fully, I mean, that's not the whole process, right? I mean, we're just talking about a minimally viable product.
Right. So the MVP didn't do every single check that every single claim would need, but it allowed us to establish a lower bound because in this case, cardiology was the simplest kind of claim. And that lower bound was on, both, value, but also technical performance. So we could run a set of, say, radiology claims, which has more nuanced logic than cardiology, and say, well, even if you treated radiology claims just like cardiology, you'd expect a savings of, X%. So if we built out radiology with all its nuanced logic, that savings would be higher. So expected, we got a floor there for value. And then on the technical side, with those testing tools, it kind of allowed us to set an upper bound on performance. So every piece of logic wasn't done, but we were able to basically validate the design when processing large numbers of claims. And it gave us some insights into what metrics we were going to need to track later down the line when we scaled the system up to more claims and more care categories.
All right. So you know, kind of techie at heart. So let's actually talk about some of the solution that you developed. Let's actually go through that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's kind of what the slide's showing here. I'll go through each of these pieces, but the system was basically broken down into these four categories. So that's the rules engine, the dashboard, the reporting, and administration console. So I'm gonna start with the rules engine. That's kind of the core of the application. The rules engine is what processed all of our claims, about 97% of them actually. We kind of built it around four ideas. So we wanted a modular design, we wanted auditability, we wanted transactionality, and we wanted fault tolerance. So that's kind of how our rules engine was designed. But that being said, not every claim could be processed automatically. About 97% were. About 3% went to the dashboard, which you can see in the second box there. There's certain situations where this was necessary. Sometimes if there were multiple authorizations on file and the engine couldn't automatically make a decision, we'd want an operations user to look at that. Basically, a operations user could go into an Appian dashboard front end, go look at the claim history for that member, do any kind of research they would need to resolve that claim, and a user would be the one making the final determination about whether the claim should be paid or not. This kind of replaced having to log into a bunch of different systems and do a lot of logic, do a lot of kind of navigation all over the place. Instead, we kind of brought that into one screen in Appian where they could do all their work. For reporting, additional need of their operations staff was to answer questions about how many claims were being processed, how many were going to the dashboard, and whether or not SLAs were being met. So we built out a reporting dashboard where all that information was visible. Last piece was administration. Since the engine was composed of different modules and we knew that there were going to be a lot of different claim types coming in from different clients, we wanted easy front-end configuration to kind of toggle modules on and off. So for instance, like a cardiology claim might need to just go through an authorization check, is there an auth on file? Whereas a radiology claim might need to go through that check, but also a provider check and a data service check in addition to that. So some of the business rules there were, parameterized, and those parameters were front-end configurable. Just another example, health plan A might allow a 15-day grace period for services. So if you were authorized, and you didn't get it done by the deadline, they would allow a grace period of 50 days. Another client might allow it to be 30 days. And we wanted those to be easy to change. I mean, think about, COVID, right? How many deadlines got pushed back at the last minute? With this administration dashboard, someone could just go in and change that without having to, redeploy code. So we wanted that kind of runtime flexibility there. So that was kind of the last piece of the engine.
Yeah, I guess the flexibility kind of future-proofs the solution, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can we talk a little bit more about modularity? This kind of caught my eye a little bit here. It's a term that gets brought up a lot when talking about software, especially with BPM types of solutions.
Yeah, so we knew that the client needed different modules for different kinds of claims, as I mentioned earlier. So the modular design allowed us to kind of toggle features on and off depending on what type of claim it was and where it was coming from. To kind of implement a modular design in Appian, we really relied on a lot of the out-of-the-box components. For example, encapsulating pieces of logic into process models, which can be easily rearranged, as well as subdividing the business rules into Appian expression rules, which make the code, maintainable and easy to read.
And because the design was so modular and closely connected to the business logic, we were able to build auditing directly into the engine. So that was a clear link between the business rules being executed and the audit data that was being captured. I mean, we could answer questions like, why did this claim have a certain outcome? And this helps field customer questions, as well as broader summary statistics like how long did a claim take to process, or maybe like what percentage of the claims triggered a specific outcome. So if auditors really wanted to understand, why a claim was paid or not, our processors were able to capture data at key decision points, which we could use to help explain these claims outcomes. And this is super important for quantity management, since quantities can go up and down over time, and people really needed to understand what the given quantity of a service was at any time in the past.
Yeah, and just because Eric, brought up auditing there, the transactionality piece helped with that too. So, I mean, this is kind of closer to data design, but, it fed into our Appian design. So like what we had is basically, we didn't just store the single state of a claim. We stored all the transactions that made up that claim over time. And that allowed us to see a complete sequence of events that led to a claim having a specific outcome. So we could see when the claim was adjusted, when it was finalized, whether a user went in and made a change, what changes did they make? And basically what this meant is on the dashboard, someone could go in and see the whole history of a claim from the moment we saw it until we provided a response to the health plan.
I love auditability. You know what I don't love? That's recovery. So we're talking about, so one of the things that caught my eye was this fault tolerance here. And so when you're talking about fault tolerance, recovery, what do you mean by recovery? What do the client need to recover from?
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that the customers, and that would be the health plans, their experience was seamless regardless of whatever internal, technical condition was going on. So the system needed to be fault tolerant when there was something like a network outage, which happens a lot, something like an upgrade or restart occurring on a regular basis. So a big focus of our engine's design was ensuring that claims could basically stop processing and be restarted if, an error happened. Kind of interesting from a requirements and design perspective, though, because there is, it sounds technical, restarting a claim or, network conditions, but it does lead to some interesting business cases. For instance, if like the engine goes down for several days, because maybe complicated upgrades happening, you don't want users to have to do 5 days worth of tasks in one day. So, we had to think about those kind of situations and build that into our recovery processes so that we didn't have like weird things happen, in the case of faults. So we had to cover those when we were thinking about fault tolerance.
Okay, so that's less scary, blood pressure going down. Hey, can we go back, Jake, about maybe 5 minutes ago, you're talking about claims that were processed automatically. I think you gave a statistic, some like 96% of claims were processed automatically. So what happened to the other percent there, just 4%, 3%, whatever? Why did those 3%, what actually happened to those?
I can answer this. So we had a number of different scenarios where it was kind of necessary to have human interaction. And so we built out the functionality of the dashboard around these scenarios. For instance, if a claim had multiple authorizations that could bill against, we would present the user, the operations user, with the multiple authorizations, kind of summarize them, and link to the data that they would need to make a decision about which one to bill against. The engine would make a suggestion as to which one, but we want to give them the ability to confirm that, because a lot of the authorizations in the system would have comments, and by reading those comments, the operation user might decide that we need to switch which one is being used or reprioritize the order of them or for reprocessing and stuff like that.
Yeah, and from a technical perspective, the dashboard actually gave us a cool opportunity to build out some like interesting things in Appian. Like one thing we built out was this custom task reassignment component, which allowed claims to kind of bounce back and forth between assignees if they needed review by multiple people. And that gave some cool, nice flexibility to the operations users there. We also did some custom saved drafts for a claim, which basically let people, save drafts if they couldn't finish that claim in one sitting, because maybe there were some complications as the comments on the authorization might show. But what was cool is because we use that modular pattern, we were able to leverage some of the rules in the engine in the dashboard. So a change to the engine didn't require, multiple changes to the dashboard as well. So we were able to pull in those modules into the dashboard, which meant that we could reuse a lot of our components and a lot of our logic would be updated in both places. That really accelerated the development there. And just kind of in general, with that clean modern UX, users really remarked on how clean and focused the dashboard was, in contrast to a lot of other legacy systems that they were, used on a daily basis. And I think that kind of speaks to how Appian maintains a pretty nice and modern set of interface patterns that are, easy to develop, but also easy on the eyes of the users actually using them.
Yeah, UIs are so important to helping users get their jobs done. One thing you mentioned before was dashboarding. I'm so glad you did. It falls into reporting. You know how I heart reporting and I heart data there. So regarding reporting, were there any cool reports that you guys got to build out?
Yeah, like one that I'm thinking of is our SLA burndown chart. Now, if you're familiar with Agile, the burndown chart is what you use in a sprint to see how much development work you have remaining. We kind of remembered that and built out sort of an SLA burndown report, which showed how many claims were either piling up or getting worked on the dashboard. So that was kind of fun because it married our like Agile knowledge with our claims knowledge and our system knowledge. And the operations team really found that helpful, so they could like fine tune how much time people were spending at, processing claims.
Got it. Well, so let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the other deliverables that you guys were able to provide. Jake, you want to talk a little bit about the test bench and the integration layer?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with that first kind of circle at the top there, the test bench. So during development, we realized it was going to be really important to have a testing tool so we could do repeatable testing that was reliable. So we did know the requirements for our MVP customer for cardiology, but we knew that there'd be more customers in the future and they would have different care categories, and those care categories would have different claim processing scenarios. So we kind of saw that over time, the number of test scenarios you'd have to do every sprint would increase exponentially, essentially. So to kind of handle that, we built an internal testing system, which we called the scenario builder, which allowed a QA user to fully test the engine and the dashboard in an automated fashion. So this originally was just a tool for the developers to use. But after a couple of weeks, we pitched it to the client as like, hey, this is an additional thing we can build out. They loved the idea and they let us spend a couple more weeks making it kind of production ready. And we actually built out a really full featured solution that we handed off as additional deliverable with the engine, which let high quality QA continue.
Yeah, I gotta say that scenario builder really saved us a lot of time. I mean, our QA resources really appreciated the fact that they could spend their time designing better scenarios to test because of the complexity of the system, rather than having to go through the manual process of passing JSON documents into the engine and manually looking at the results all the time. With these suites of regression tests that were loaded into the system ready to go, every release we could just fully regression test with the same well-designed set of tests. And since we were doing it every 2 weeks, it really made a huge difference.
Yeah, and not to like repeat myself too much, but just going back to modularity, to build this test bench, we basically were pulling in things from the engine, and that just made it a lot quicker to develop. So those modules being there, we were able to use for testing as well. And what would have otherwise been just some test scripts on someone's laptop that got lost eventually now became like an actual Appian application that, was updated as the project went on. Do you want to move into integration layer here? So, we were able to deliver a very flexible integration layer that was easy to maintain. I think everyone knows that system integration is probably the riskiest project activity, and we had like 10 different systems to integrate with.
That's typically the hardest part of a project, right? The integrations.
Oh yeah, for sure. But we were able to utilize a lot of Appian's native integration and authentication components, so we could build something out that was really easy to use and easy to adapt. As exciting as it is to build out a new application from scratch, you want to make it easy to adapt, right? As requirements change and new things get added, kind of flows into future proofing here. So, as part of our engagement, we also worked really closely with the customer's internal dev team to make sure that they fully understood the system and had really clear documentation on how everything fit together. We actually did a structure where every member of our dev team kind of had a partner on the client dev team, and we just worked together for a couple of weeks one-on-one. So everyone at the client got a personalized training, which they really appreciated, and it made the transition between initial development and maintenance mode much easier.
Yeah, that's pretty helpful, Jake.
No doubt. So, guys, we've talked so far about what our client was looking for, what we did, and now it's time for the rubber to hit the road. Eric, how did our client's world change as a result of what they got?
Well, we went live back in December of 2018 with our first solution and one of our clients' customers. And so we measured like the success of the next 9 months. The potential opportunity savings that we calculated from just that one solution and one client was almost $26 million. We processed over 375,000 transactions during this time. And I know our goal was to have like 97% do automatically go through the engine. We actually had about 98 to 98.5% of them requiring no human interaction whatsoever. So, our client's customer was extremely happy with the solution. And our client was happy with the process by which we got there. We, building it iteratively, showing them results to client on a biweekly basis. It made the go live so anticlimactic, which is pretty much the way we like it.
And of course, everything went perfectly according to plan, right?
Well, like the go live was smooth, which is great, but there's always challenges and hiccups along the way. Whenever you build a solution from scratch that isn't replacing an existing one, it usually means that the client doesn't really always know what they want until they start seeing it and realize that what they need are modifications and stuff. So that's why when you're building in an agile environment, that's really key. You're able to get an MVP solution done quickly, and you can just build on top of that. And you get feedback every 2 weeks. So as we developed and tested with our client and their customer, we were able to identify different claim solutions that we didn't account for in our requirements. Claims data is really not the cleanest thing in the world.
Like there was that guy whose last name was Null, I remember.
Oh my God, this is a crazy situation. I can't say I've ever seen this before, and I've seen a lot of data things, but it wasn't that his last name was blank. It was actually that his last name was Null, Null. So the claim,
like in the database, no?
Yeah, exactly. And so the claim we could go through our application, no problem, didn't cause any crashing. But when part of our solution is we call the enterprise services of our client and try to find the actual member ID based on the claim member information. And so when we attempted to do this, we would pass in, first name, last name, and things like that. And the enterprise legacy service took that null as basically a null value and made it blank. And so they were never able to find a member match, which without a member match, we are not able to find any authorizations on file and things like that. So, you always have data issues, but didn't expect to see something like that on the claim.
Yeah. I bet Mr. Null left that experience feeling rather empty, huh?
Yeah, poor guy.
Poor joke.
Yeah. And another challenge just to touch on is that the teams at the client were themselves really busy. I mean, as were we, but they were simultaneously in the process of modernizing a lot of their other infrastructure and services, which we were dependent on. So, we were always kind of, waiting on each other to get things done because we were so busy. So what we ended up doing was stubbing out a lot of our services and using mock data to do our development until the real services themselves were done, which, sped our development. It also helped later down the line with testing because, as we said, when we wanted to develop out those future care categories, we already kind of had a way to test against data that, those services didn't exist for. So those stubbed out services were used not only for the initial development, but also for the testing of some of the future solution development as well.
Jacob, that reminds me that, I forgot the client was also modernizing their IT processes as well. I mean, they were in a long-term process to start using scaled agile framework or SAFe. And for part of this, we had to adjust our development and story refinement processes to based on their dependencies to make it into the right team sprints and vice versa. And so this really hinged on good planning and estimation throughout so that everyone knew what was needed and when.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, guys, I hate to break up this interesting conversation, but it looks like we're starting to get a few questions from our audience here. So just hold on for 1 second. Okay, so here's one. I know claims come in a huge number of formats. How did you handle the fact that different claims from different sources would look differently?
Yeah, I guess I can take that one. So the kind of the claim inbound and the outbound piece, so that was like when claims are coming into the engine from the health plan, and outbound would be when the response is getting sent back to the health plan. Was actually kind of an interesting design and definitely something that we thought about a lot. We knew first off that different health plans were going to have claims coming in different formats. Some health plans would send it by JSON, some might send it via XML. I know there's one in healthcare called 837. So we were able to work with the client had an enterprise gateway solution called Axway. And we felt it was best to have the gateway do all the translation of those incoming claims into a common format that the engine would use as a standard. So internally, we basically took all those JSON, those XML, those 837 documents, and turned them into our internal claim structure. And then similarly on the outbound, we would take our internal claim structure and translate it back to whatever format the health plan needed. So we had that common internal structure. It's also useful for any future applications. So if anyone wanted to do a claim inquiry and see what claims had come in from different clients, they could query against our internal structure so that the client internally had claims from all different kinds of health plans, all different kinds of claims in the same kind of data structure. So it was good that we did that intermediate format so that other consumers could look at those claims.
So there was an industry standard format called 837.
Yeah, 837. I think the documentation on the standard is like 1,000 pages or something like that. It's a complicated one.
Not 837 pages.
No, more than
that. All right. Here's another one. I can see how your solution addresses a particular problem in the healthcare space. Is there anything about your solution or your process that lends itself to other domains or challenges?
Yeah, I'd say, the concept can be used in multiple organizations. Basically, wherever transactions have to be processed and sent to a third party before it gets finalized. For example, maybe if you're putting information online when you're buying a product, that company's website will often send credit card information to a third party to validate it against their set of data. So while it seems seamless to the consumer, behind the scenes, using that organization is using a third party API to validate part of their transaction. So it can be used in lots of places.
Yeah, also like just tied to like recent events, right? You could use kind of a similar design if you wanted to see, say, like who got a vaccine before going onto a flight, right? You have a system that runs a number of checks, like check CVS, check Walgreens, check, government database or whatever. And you can kind of do that kind of asynchronous processing for validating that kind of data as well. Also something similar might be like a background check. So often these come from like a third party, site looks kind of weird, doesn't come from the company that's actually doing the background check on you. You could kind of move that all in the back end and have a background check system that kind of works out of sight from the end user using a system kind of like ours.
Sure. Is one, how did working remote with COVID affect the team?
Well, we actually weren't working during COVID on this project. We actually finished it pre-COVID, but nevertheless, we were mostly remote at the time. Several team members being fully remote, we utilized different messaging platforms that are currently being used today. I mean, we use Zoom a lot for meetings, which worked really well. Gave our teams being remote a lot of flexibility and let us fully utilize people on and off the client site. The client also actually has multiple locations in the Chicago suburbs, which allowed us to easily meet with them without having to travel from building to building or worrying about any kind of transportation. So I think if we started up a project again and had to do it fully remotely, I think based on our experience, we'd be pretty well prepared.
Yeah, just speaking for Macedon, we worked out of our headquarters in Virginia, which allowed us to closely collaborate, as the Appian team. But we did adjust our schedules, right, to be in Central Time, which is where the client was located, just to make sure the project ran smoothly and that everyone was able to make meetings, in their preferred time zone.
Yeah, it's really important when consulting. Here's another one. Should every tech project have a test bench? How did you design for load?
Yeah, test bench. So in my opinion, yes. Obviously, everyone wants their systems to be well tested. That's pretty obvious. But if you don't have a strategy going into that, it becomes either really burdensome or just gets overlooked. So I think by investing that extra time up front to build out some automation around testing, you get a big return on investment, both in terms of hours saved down the line, but also bugs caught that you may not have got to if you didn't have automation in place. For the load testing piece, load testing strategy was similar. I mean, we were able to use that test bench, but what we did is we were able to get historical case data from the client. We loaded it into their enterprise systems by ETL, and then we were able to actually generate thousands of claims with a dispatching process that was actually in the testing tool. So additional benefit of that, to basically simulate the load at various levels. And what this produces is kind of a graph. And that graph has like the x-axis as how many claims you're passing in, and the y-axis is like how well is the system performing. And where that graph kind of just like crashes is like your maximum number of claims you can put in. And by kind of having that metric and that graph ready, what we did is like as we made performance improvements, we would see that the number of claims you could pass in before the system, having problems got further and further to the right. So by having that metric, by having the ability to pass in claims and then, kind of doing that iteratively, we're able to, come up with a solution that could process lots and lots of claims. As far as designing for load, I think what we realized is that really, at least in Appian, that really relies on following a lot of those Appian best practices. So without getting too technical, in Appian terms, we did look at things like decreasing the process memory footprint, utilizing chaining functionality in certain circumstances. We did a lot of kind of combining processes and like shifting logic between the app server and the process engines. And by kind of following those best practices for performance, what you'll find is that Appian can be used for enterprise scale system loads. Yeah,
and I guess in some ways that's part art, part science. Would you agree with that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, knowing those metrics, being able to understand them, and then being able to kind of like learn what the data is telling you in terms of performance.
Yeah. Here's another question. You mentioned using Appian for this project. Were there other technologies that were used?
Yeah, there were several actually technologies that we used. So the core claims match application had Appian as a front end and processing piece, and it connected to our SQL Server database through a set of microservices that were built in Java. But the whole claims match application would interact with the enterprise services of the organization. And then I think Jake mentioned earlier that we had a gateway that would translate the claims that came in with different formats into a format that we could use. So that gateway was Axway, and it would send the claims from Axway to the claims match system on a messaging service called RabbitMQ. So we'd use RabbitMQ to send it to us, And then we would use RabbitMQ to send it back to Axway before they translated it and then send it back off to the client's customers.
Okay. Let's switch. So this question switches back to more the businessy type thing. So can you expand a little bit more on the change management activities that you performed on this project? What did you do to communicate across stakeholder groups, train up end users, ensure operational readiness, and a smooth go live?
So there are a couple of things we did here. Well, first of all, because we were doing in an agile methodology format, we were able to do demos to the client, to stakeholders every 2 weeks, show them our progress, get feedback from there on out. Now, this is a new application, so they didn't already have an operation team in place. So we had to help them put together their training documentation and show them how to utilize the system so that once we did go live, they could work on those manual transactions that came in at 2 to 3% that we were expecting. So we did a lot of training. We helped them document what those were, and then we actually helped conduct the training with them. And then we sat with them. Once we went live, we actually were there with the operational users. So as they were using it, if they had questions and concerns, they could reach us right away and talk to us, and we could help research any claims that came in that might have had some different data issues that they weren't aware of.
Okay. Can you speak a little more to how the modular design interacted with enterprise configurations? Any lessons learned in approaching design in a modular fashion?
Yeah, I could take this one. So I guess to kind of recap, so the modular design, I think it says before, but it basically made it easy to turn on and off certain parts of the engine. And what this meant was there were a lot of points where you could add a configuration and say, like, skip this under certain circumstances, or like look at a configuration instead of just doing it all the time. So we kind of looked for like opportunities like that, like, can we add a configuration point here? As far as lessons, I think one is just to be disciplined about when you're adding new functionality, make sure it kind of goes in the right place. So often in development, it's really fast and convenient to just like add a feature, kind of like in an ad hoc way. But if you're trying to maintain that modular design, I would say just, add a little more thought when you're thinking about the feature and saying like, what module does this really belong in? And that just makes, adding new features, more easy, and makes configuration easier as well. So yeah, just make sure that you're really making sure that every feature you add is part of a module and it's in the right module.
Got it. Okay. Well, I think that's looks like that's the end of our questions here. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. We had some great conversation here today. Please follow us on your favorite social media channel. Stay tuned for news on our next webinar. Thank you to our panelists, Eric and Jake. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I hope that everyone has a great day.